In the Texas frontier, a man's honor was everything. But when that honor was gambled away, the price was paid in blood, or in this case, flesh and bone. This is the story of a debt so deep it couldn't be settled with gold or gunpowder. A debt that demanded a life. A Comanche warrior, his people dying, came to collect what a desperate white man owed him. He didn't take his horse. He didn't take his rifle. He didn't take his scalp. He took his daughter. What followed wasn't just a tale of captivity, but of a spirit that refused to be broken, a heart that could not be tamed, and a love that would rewrite the fate of an entire nation. The year was 1874. The air in the Texas Panhandle was thick with two things: the red dust of the Llano Estacado and the stench of broken dreams. For 19-year-old Abigail Hayes, that smell clung to the threadbare canvas of the wagon she called home. It clung to the sour breath of her father, Silas. He was a man hollowed out by bad luck and even worse whiskey. His hands, once strong enough to build a life, now only knew how to shuffle a deck of greasy cards or clutch a bottle. Abigail, however, was different. She had a resilience that was an insult to the bleak landscape around her. Her hair was the color of sun-cured wheat, and her startling blue eyes held a clear, practical light that her father had lost long ago. She'd followed him from a respectable life in St. Louis, chasing his wild tales of silver veins and rich trading. All she found was a poverty more suffocating than any city slum. Their latest failure was a tiny ramshackle trading post near the prairie dog town fork of the Red River, a place that saw more tumbleweeds than customers. The real trouble started 3 months back. A band of Quahati Comanche, led by a warrior named Nkoni, had approached their post. They weren't raiding, they were trading. Their people, camped deep in the canyons, were dying from the white man's coughing sickness, a brutal, chest-rattling plague that was stealing the young and the old. Nkoni, whose name meant "he who kills the night," spoke broken but clear English. He didn't want trinkets or whiskey. He needed medicine. He laid out a fortune in perfectly tanned buffalo hides, enough to make Silas a rich man. Silas, his eyes gleaming with a familiar, greedy light, made a promise he knew he couldn't keep. He took the hides, and he swore on his daughter's life that he would ride to Fort Griffin and return within a month with quinine, laudanum, and carbolic acid. But 1 month bled into 2. The money from the hides vanished in a backroom card game in a dusty settlement that didn't even have a name. Every time Abigail asked about the medicine, Silas would wave a dismissive hand, his promises turning to ash in his mouth. The supply wagon was raided, he'd lie. The river's too high, he'd hedge. Abigail knew. She saw the way his hands trembled whenever a lone rider appeared on the horizon. She could feel the weight of the coming storm. The storm finally broke on a Tuesday. The sun was a merciless hammer in a white-hot sky, beating down on the parched earth. Abigail was outside, mending a leaky water barrel, when she saw them. Not a chaotic war party, but a deliberate, disciplined procession of 5 warriors. They moved as one, their ponies seeming to float over the landscape. Leading them was Nkoni. He looked like he was carved from the earth itself. His face was a mask of hard angles and sun-weathered resolve, his long black hair held back by a simple leather band. The only color on him was the intricate beadwork on his moccasins and a single hawk feather tied in his hair. He dismounted in front of their hovel, and his presence seemed to suck all the air from the clearing. He didn't even look at Abigail. His piercing dark eyes were fixed on the door. From inside, Silas stumbled out, his face pale with a fear so pure it was almost white. "You have what is ours." Nkoni's voice was low, a rumble like distant thunder. It wasn't a question. "There were complications," Silas stammered, wringing his hands. "The army. They seized the supplies. I need more time." Nkoni's expression didn't change, but a cold fire ignited in his eyes. He took a single step forward, and Silas flinched back as if he'd been struck. "You speak with the forked tongue of the snake. You swore an oath." "I did. I'll make it right," Silas pleaded, his voice cracking. "I have nothing left. Take the wagon. Take the rifles. Anything." Nkoni's gaze slowly, deliberately, moved from Silas, and it fell upon Abigail. She froze, the mending tool slipping from her grasp. It was not a look of lust, but of cold appraisal, as if he were judging livestock. She felt a chill crawl up her spine despite the searing heat. An oath was sworn on a life, Inconey stated, his voice flat and final. The debt is for a life. My people die. The spirits demand balance. The horror of his meaning dawned on Abigail like a physical blow. She looked at her father, her blue eyes wide with disbelief, a desperate silent plea. Surely he wouldn't. He couldn't. Silas Hayes, a man who had already sold his honor, his future, and his soul, looked at the terrifying warrior before him. Then he looked at the daughter who was the last remnant of his failed life. He saw not his child. He saw his own salvation. In a moment of ultimate cowardice, he gave a slight trembling nod. She is a hard worker, Silas whispered, the words like venomous betrayal. She can cook, and she can sew. Abigail felt the world tilt on its axis. The red dust, the buzzing flies, the oppressive sun, it all receded into a silent roar in her ears. She was no longer a person. She was a commodity, a payment. Nkoni gave a sharp command in his own tongue. Two of his warriors dismounted and moved toward her. She backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at her father one last time, her expression a maelstrom of pain and fury. He wouldn't meet her gaze. He simply turned and retreated into the dark interior of the cabin, closing the door on his daughter's life. There was no scream, no struggle. What was the use? Where could she run? A profound, icy calm washed over her. As the warriors took her arms, their grips firm but not brutal, she held her head high. She met Nkoni's gaze, and for the first time, he truly looked at her. He saw not a trembling doe, but a she-wolf, cornered and defiant. Her blue eyes burned with a silent promise of their own. You may take my body, but you will never break my spirit. He gave a curt nod, as if acknowledging her unspoken challenge. One of the warriors lifted her onto the back of a spare pony. Without a backward glance, the Comanche turned and rode east, into the vast, unforgiving wilderness that was now to be her cage, leaving behind a closed door and the ghost of a man who had sold his own blood for a few more wretched breaths of life. The journey to the Comanche camp was a waking nightmare. The world Abigail had known, a world of iron stoves and glass windows, had been stripped away. It was replaced by an endless panorama of rock, scrub, and sky. They rode for 3 days. She wasn't bound, but the 4 warriors surrounding her were a more effective prison than any rope or chain. Nkoni rode at the head of the party, his back a rigid wall of muscle and leather. He never once looked back. Her initial shock gave way to a simmering, calculated rage. She wasn't just a victim, she was a survivor, and she would find a way out. On the second day, while they made a brief stop at a shallow creek, she saw her chance. While the warriors watered their horses, she bolted. She ran with a desperation that burned in her lungs, pushing through thorny bushes, her dress tearing, her feet stumbling on the rocky ground. She didn't get 30 yards. A rope snaked through the air, catching her around the waist and pulling her off her feet. She landed hard, the air knocked from her chest. Nkoni was the one holding the rope. He reeled her in like a fish, his face impassive. He hauled her to her feet, his grip on her arm like iron. Do not run again, he said, his voice low and devoid of emotion. The coyote would find you before nightfall. Or the soldiers. Their deaths are slower than ours. He released her. The shame of her failed attempt was almost as painful as her bruises. She understood then. Her cage was not the warriors. It was the land itself. She was a child in this world, and they were its masters. From then on, she rode in silent compliance. But her mind was a whirlwind of observation. She memorized the shape of the mesas, the direction of the sun, the feel of the wind. She watched how they found water in a dry creek bed, how they moved with such impossible stealth, how they spoke with hands and eyes as much as with their mouths. This was no longer a geography lesson. It was a textbook for survival. The camp was hidden deep in a winding canyon, a natural fortress against the outside world. Smoke from dozens of buffalo hide teepees curled into the sky, but from the plains above, the settlement would have been completely invisible. As they rode in, a hush fell over the bustling activity. Faces young and old turned to stare. She was a spectacle, a white woman, a captive brought into their midst. The stares were a mixture of curiosity, contempt, and from some of the women, pure, undiluted hatred. She was unceremoniously pushed off her pony in front of a large teepee, presumably in Coney's. A chorus of hacking coughs echoed from several of the lodges, a grim reminder of why she was here. An older woman, with a face like a wrinkled map and eyes as sharp as flint, emerged from the teepee. She spat on the ground near Abigail's feet and let out a string of harsh, angry words directed at N'Koni. He listened patiently, his face unreadable. When she was finished, he replied in a calm, measured tone. There was a brief, tense exchange before the old woman shot Abigail one last venomous look and stormed away. "That is my mother's sister, she who sees," N'Koni said, turning to Abigail. "She says you carry the white man's sickness in your spirit as well as your blood. She says you are a bad omen." "And what do you say?" Abigail asked, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "I say a debt was paid," he replied, turning to walk away. "You will work. You will earn your food. A woman named Little Fawn will show you your tasks." He left her standing there, alone in a sea of hostile faces. Little Fawn, a young woman not much older than Abigail, with kind, curious eyes, approached her hesitantly. She didn't speak English, but through gestures she indicated a pile of stinking buffalo hides that needed scraping, a task of grueling, back-breaking labor. The first few weeks were a trial by fire. Abigail was an outcast, the lowest member of the tribe. She was given the worst jobs, fetching water from the creek, scraping hides until her hands were raw and bleeding, gathering firewood from the steep canyon walls, and tending the smoky, ill-tempered fires. The children would sometimes throw pebbles at her, and the women would mutter insults just loud enough for her to hear their disdain, if not their words. Her primary antagonist was a warrior named Stonehand. He was bigger than N'Koni, with a brutish face and a palpable air of ambition. He had clearly opposed N'Koni's decision to bring her here, and he saw her presence as a weakness in his rival's leadership. He went out of his way to intimidate her, once kicking over the buckets of water she had just spent an hour carrying from the creek, laughing as she stood drenched and humiliated. Abigail endured it all with a stoic defiance she didn't know she possessed. She refused to cry, refused to show weakness. She performed her task meticulously, her rage fueling her through the exhaustion. She learned to be invisible, to keep her head down and her eyes open. Her only solace was Little Fawn, who would occasionally leave a piece of roasted rabbit or a handful of berries for her. At night, huddled under a thin blanket in a small lean-to beside N'Koni's teepee, she would look up at the brilliant, indifferent stars, 1,000 miles from everything she had ever known, a prisoner. But as she listened to the mournful sound of the coughing that echoed through the canyon, a strange seed of an idea began to take root in her mind. She was here because of this sickness. Perhaps the sickness itself was the key, not just to her survival, but to something more, something she hadn't yet dared to name: freedom. The coughing sickness, the Naria Mo, as the Comanche called it, was a relentless thief. It stole the breath from the chests of elders and the laughter from the mouths of children. The tribe's medicine man, an ancient figure named Buffalo Hump, performed chants and offered sacred herbs, but the spirits remained deaf. The sickness spread like a foul miasma in the close confines of the winter camp. Abigail, relegated to the camp's periphery, was a constant, unwilling witness to the suffering. She watched as mothers wept over listless children and as strong warriors were reduced to wheezing shadows. But she saw more than just the illness. She saw its method. She noticed that the sickness was worst in the teepees, where many people crowded together. She saw them share drinking gourds without washing them. She saw them spit the phlegm from their lungs onto the dirt floors of their lodges. Her mother, before she passed, had been a woman of science and reason. She had taught Abigail about the unseen germs that doctors in England were writing about. She had taught her the importance of cleanliness, of boiling water, of isolating the sick. These were radical, often mocked ideas back east. Out here, they were utterly alien. An idea, dangerous and bold, began to form in Abigail's mind. It was a gamble that could get her killed, but doing nothing felt like a slower, more certain death. She started small, with herself. She began boiling the water Little Fawn brought her before drinking it. She washed her hands obsessively. At first, the other women mocked her strange rituals, but they also noticed she did not sicken. Her opportunity came in the form of a small boy named Che, Little Fawn's nephew. His coughs had grown ragged and weak, his fever dangerously high. Abigail watched as Buffalo Hump performed a smoke ceremony over him to drive out the evil spirits, but the boy only worsened. That evening, Little Fawn came to Abigail's lean-to, her face streaked with tears. Through desperate gestures and the few words of Comanche Abigail had learned, she begged for help. Abigail knew she was crossing a line. To interfere with the medicine man was to challenge the very core of the tribe's beliefs. It was an insult to their spirits, their ancestors, their power. Stone Hand was already watching her like a hawk, eager for any excuse to condemn her. But looking into Little Fawn's pleading eyes, she couldn't refuse. Taking a deep breath, she walked to Little Fawn's teepee. Inside, the air was hot and stagnant. Che lay on a pile of furs, his breathing shallow. His mother, a woman named Meadow Song, looked at Abigail with desperation, warring with suspicion. Abigail didn't touch the boy. She spoke calmly to Little Fawn, using gestures. Fire, hot water, clean cloths. She had Little Fawn bring a bowl of steaming water. She dipped a clean piece of hide into it and gently wiped the boy's feverish face. Next, she gestured for them to move his sleeping furs away from the main family area to a corner of the teepee where the air circulated better. Finally, she remembered a concoction her mother used for chest ailments. She pointed to the willow bark she had seen growing by the creek and the wild mint she had gathered. She mimed crushing them and steeping them in hot water to make a tea. Meadow Song was hesitant, but Little Fawn, trusting, did as she was told. Abigail made them understand that Che should be the only one to drink from his cup and that it must be washed with hot water after every use. She worked through the night, not as a medicine woman, but as a nurse. She kept the boy cool, made him drink the bitter willow bark tea, and insisted on fresh air and cleanliness. Just before dawn, Inconi appeared at the entrance of the teepee. He had been told of her interference. His face was a thundercloud, his hand resting on the knife at his belt. Stonehand stood behind him, a smirk of triumph on his face. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The white woman had sealed her fate. "You defy our ways," Inconi's voice was dangerously quiet. Abigail rose to her feet, her body aching with exhaustion, but her voice clear and steady. "Your ways are not saving him. His fire is burning too hot and his chest is full of water. I am trying to cool the fire and clear the water." She used simple, direct language, devoid of mysticism. She wasn't claiming magic. She was explaining a process. Inconi looked from her determined face to the small, breathing child. He saw the clean cloths, the isolated sleeping area, the steam still rising from the willow tea. He saw not witchcraft, but work. He stayed silent for a long moment, the tension in the teepee thick enough to choke on. Then he looked at Stonehand. "Leave." Stonehand's smirk vanished, replaced by disbelief, then fury. He argued, his voice rising, but Inconi cut him off with a single sharp word in their tongue. Defeated, Stonehand shot Abigail a look of pure venom before stalking away. Inconi turned his gaze back to Abigail. "If the boy dies," he said, the implication hanging heavy in the air. He didn't need to finish. He left her to her work. For 2 days, Abigail barely slept. She enlisted Little Fawn and Meadow Song, teaching them her methods. On the third morning, Che's fever broke. His coughing, while still present, was no longer the dry, hacking rasp of a dying child, but a productive cough that began to clear his lungs. He asked for food. The news spread through the camp like wildfire. It wasn't a miracle, but it was something tangible, a result. Some, like Stonehand and his followers, claimed it was white man's trickery, but others, the mothers and grandmothers who had watched their own kin fade away, looked at Abigail with a new light in their eyes. It wasn't acceptance, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall of their hatred. That evening, as Abigail finally rested outside her lean-to, Inconi approached. He stood before her for a long moment, then placed something on the ground. It was a thick, warm buffalo robe, finely tanned and soft to the touch, a vast improvement over her thin, ragged blanket. "The nights are cold," was all he said, before turning and walking back to his teepee. It was not an apology, it was not a thank you, but it was an acknowledgement, a recognition. As Abigail pulled the heavy robe around her shoulders, she felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the buffalo hide. For the first time since her capture, she felt not like a piece of property, but like a person. And she realized the key to her freedom might not be in escaping the Comanche, but in becoming indispensable to them. Che's recovery was a turning point. It did not make Abigail a beloved member of the tribe, but it made her a resource, a curiosity. The medicine man, Buffalo Hump, watched her from afar, his expression a mixture of professional jealousy and grudging respect. He did not challenge her, nor did he endorse her. He simply observed. Slowly, other women began to approach her, not with friendship, but with a desperate transactional need. A mother whose baby was feverish, a woman with a deep cut on her hand that was beginning to fester. Abigail never claimed to be a healer. She simply offered what she knew. Boil the water, wash the wound, bind it with clean cloth, use a poultice of yarrow to stop the bleeding. Simple, practical knowledge that to them seemed like a strange and potent magic. Her status in the camp began to shift in subtle ways. Her tasks were still laborious, but no one kicked over her water buckets anymore. The children stopped throwing stones, instead watching her with wide, inquisitive eyes. She was moved from the flimsy lean-to into a small teepee of her own, a significant gesture of elevated standing. Nkoni remained a distant, watchful presence. He never spoke to her about her healing work, but she knew he was aware of everything. She would feel his eyes on her as she ground herbs or instructed a mother on how to make a steam tent for a congested child. The dynamic between them was changing, evolving from captor and captive to something far more complex and unspoken. He was the leader of his people, and she was, inexplicably, becoming vital to their survival. The real test came when she who sees, the old woman who had first spat at her feet, fell ill. The sickness took hold of her with a terrifying speed, her powerful frame racked with coughing fits that left her breathless. For days, Buffalo Hump tried every ritual and sacred medicine he knew. But the old woman only slipped further away. The camp held its breath. She who sees was not just Nkoni's aunt. She was the tribe's matriarch, a keeper of stories and traditions. Her death would be a devastating blow to their morale. One evening, Nkoni came to Abigail's teepee. It was the first time he had ever entered it. He stood awkwardly in the small space, his large frame seeming to fill it entirely. "She will not last the night," he said, his voice heavy. Abigail met his gaze. "Buffalo Hump will not allow me near her." "I will," Nkoni stated. It was an order, but also a plea. "Do what you did for the boy." This was a far greater risk. Che was a child. She who sees was a pillar of the community. If she died under Abigail's care, Stonehand and his faction would have all the ammunition they needed. They would call her a witch, a murderer. They would demand her death, and Nkoni might not be able to stop them. She looked into his dark, troubled eyes and saw not just a warrior, but a man burdened by the weight of leadership, terrified of losing his family and his people. In that moment, she made a choice. "I will need help," she said. "Little Fawn, Meadow Song, and two other women who will do exactly as I say. I need fire, many blankets, and all the willow bark and mint they can gather." For the next 4 days, Abigail's small teepee became an infirmary, and the matriarch's lodge became a quarantine zone. Abigail was relentless. She forced the old woman to drink fluids. She used hot stones wrapped in wet cloths to create a steam that filled the lodge and eased her breathing. She was firm but gentle, treating the matriarch not as a spiritual icon, but as a patient. The most dramatic confrontation happened on the second day. Stonehand, furious at this blatant disregard for tradition, strode to the teepee with two of his followers, intending to drag Abigail out. Nkoni met him at the entrance. The two warriors stood face to face, their rivalry finally erupting into the open. "You let this white-skinned witch practice her dark arts on your own blood," Stonehand snarled. "You are weak. You have shamed us." "She uses water and herbs, not spells," Nkoni countered, his voice like ice. "Your anger is a greater sickness to this tribe than the cough. You will not enter this lodge." And who will stop me? Stone Hand sneered, placing a hand on his knife. Nkoni didn't draw his own weapon. He simply planted his feet. I will. The standoff was broken by a weak, raspy voice from inside the teepee. It was she who sees. She spoke only a few words in the Comanche tongue, but their effect was immediate. Stonehand's face went pale. His followers backed away. With a final, hate-filled glare at Nkoni, he turned and stalked off. Abigail, who had watched from the flap, looked at Nkoni. What did she say? A flicker of something, amusement perhaps, crossed Nkoni's face. She told him if he interrupts her sleep again, she will rise from her deathbed and tan his hide for a saddlebag. It was the first time Abigail had seen even a hint of a smile from him. It changed his entire face, softening the hard lines and revealing a glimpse of the man beneath the warrior. Against all odds, she who sees began to recover. The fever receded, and the terrible lung-shredding coughs slowly subsided. A week later, she was sitting up, thin and weak, but alive. Her recovery cemented Abigail's place in the tribe in a way nothing else could have. One afternoon, the old woman summoned Abigail to her teepee. She looked at Abigail with her sharp, intelligent eyes, which no longer held hatred, but a deep, searching curiosity. You have a strong spirit, she who sees said, her voice still weak. It was the first time she had ever spoken to Abigail directly. The white men who come to our lands have spirits of greed and cruelty. You are not like them. I only did what my mother taught me, Abigail replied quietly. She, who sees, nodded slowly. Your mother was a wise woman. A good healer sees with her heart, not just her eyes. You have the heart of a healer. She then gave Abigail a name, a sign of true acceptance. We will not call you the white woman anymore. We will call you Nakoa Obey. When Abigail asked Little Fawn what it meant later, the young woman beamed. It means brave heart. That night, there was a quiet change. The portion of food left for her was larger, containing a prized piece of roasted deer. Someone had mended the tear in her dress. These were small things, but in this harsh world, they were everything. She was no longer just a captive. She was Nakoa Obai. She had a name, and she had earned it not with a weapon, but with wisdom, courage, and a stubborn refusal to let death win. With her new name came a new existence. Abigail Nakoa Obey was no longer a pariah. She was an accepted, if unusual, part of the camp's fabric. She was given her own tools, better clothes, and the freedom to move about the canyon as she pleased. She established a sick lodge at the edge of the camp, a place where the ill could be isolated and cared for, a concept that was now embraced after its success. This new role brought her into more frequent contact with Nkoni. He would come to her sick lodge, not as a leader inspecting a subordinate, but as a partner. He would ask what she needed, certain herbs, cleaner water, more firewood, and would see that it was provided. Their conversations, once clipped and functional, began to lengthen. He found her intellect as sharp as her spirit. He was fascinated by her ability to read the strange markings in a book she had managed to keep, a tattered copy of Shakespeare her mother had given her. She, in turn, was captivated by his deep understanding of the natural world. He taught her the language of the plains, how to read the tracks of a wolf, how to know a storm was coming by the behavior of the birds, how the stars could serve as a map and a clock. One evening, as they sat by her fire, a comfortable silence between them, she found the courage to ask a question that had long haunted her. Why me? She asked softly. When my father defaulted on his debt, why take me? You could have taken his life. It would have been justice. Nkoni stared into the flames, his profile etched in orange and shadow. To take his life would be to take a worthless thing, he said, his English more fluid now. It would not bring back the children who died from the sickness he promised to stop. It would not give my people hope. It would be an empty act. He turned to look at her, his gaze intense. But to take a life giver, that is different. A woman holds the future of her people in her hands. She can heal. She can teach. She can give birth to warriors. Your father offered to pay his debt with an empty vessel. I chose to take the future he did not value. His words struck her with a profound force. He had not seen her as an object of lust or a servant. He had seen her, from the very beginning, as something powerful. It was a perspective so alien to the world she came from, where women were considered the weaker sex, that it left her breathless. Their bond deepened, woven from shared purpose and mutual respect. The romantic tension that had simmered beneath the surface now bloomed in the quiet moments. A shared glance across the fire, the accidental brush of his hand against hers as he passed her a tool. It was a language without words, felt in the sudden, charged stillness of the air between them. But Stonehand watched this burgeoning connection with venomous jealousy. He saw Ninconi's respect for Abigail as a betrayal of their people. He began to sow seeds of dissent, whispering to the other warriors that Ninconi was bewitched by the white woman, that her medicine was a trick to soften them, to make them weak and dependent on her. He forgets the ways of the Comanche. Stonehand would rage in the council of warriors. He listens to the words of a woman who carries the blood of our enemies. The spirits are angry. The buffalo are scarce because our leader's heart has been captured by a pale-faced witch. His words found purchase in the hearts of those who feared change, who clung to the old ways with a desperate ferocity. The camp began to divide. The climax came during a buffalo hunt. The scouts had found a small herd, the first in months. The tribe's winter stores were dangerously low. Ninconi led the hunting party, but the hunt went badly. The herd was spooked, scattering before the warriors could effectively surround them. They returned with only 3 kills, not nearly enough. Stonehand seized the opportunity. That night he stood before the entire tribe, a wild, fanatical light in his eyes. "It is as I said," he bellowed, pointing an accusing finger at Abigail, who stood beside She Who Sees. "Her presence has soured our luck. She has offended the Great Spirit. We must purge this poison from our camp if we are to survive." A murmur of agreement rippled through his supporters. Ninconi stepped forward, his face grim. "The hunt failed because our discipline was weak, not because of this woman. She has saved more lives in this camp than you have, Stonehand." "She has saved them with white man's ways," Stonehand retorted. "She makes us weak. I challenge your leadership, Ninconi. I say you are no longer fit to lead us. I say you are a slave to a woman." He drew his knife, its blade gleaming in the firelight. It was a direct, undeniable challenge. According to tribal law, Ninconi had to accept. The two men circled each other, the entire tribe a silent, tense audience. Abigail watched, her heart pounding with a terror she had never known before. This wasn't about tribal politics anymore. This was about the man she had, against all odds, come to care for. The man she was beginning to love. Her life, his life, and the future of the tribe would be decided in the next few minutes by the deadly dance of flashing steel. The firelight cast long, dancing shadows as Ninconi and Stonehand faced each other. The air was thick with the tension of a breaking storm. This was more than a duel for leadership. It was a battle for the soul of the Quahati people. A choice between the rigid, vengeful pride of the past and a new, uncertain path of adaptation and survival. Stonehand was a bull of a man, fueled by pure, undisguised rage. He lunged first, a wild, powerful slash aimed at Ninconi's throat. Ninconi moved with the fluid grace of a panther, turning the blade aside with his own knife, the clang of steel ringing sharp and clear in the sudden silence of the camp. Abigail watched, her hands clenched into fists, her knuckles white. She was the cause of this. If Ninconi fell, her own life would be forfeit in a matter of seconds. But her fear for herself was a distant echo compared to the agonizing terror she felt for him. The fight was a clash of styles. Stonehand was all brute force, his attacks heavy and meant to overpower. Ninconi was a tactician, his movements economical and precise. He gave ground, letting Stonehand exhaust himself in a flurry of furious but predictable attacks. He was not just fighting, Abigail realized. He was observing, learning his opponent's rhythm, waiting for the inevitable mistake. The mistake came after several minutes of grueling combat. Frustrated by his inability to land a decisive blow, Stonehand grew reckless. He charged, lowering his shoulder like a buffalo, his knife held low for an upward thrust. It was the move of a brawler, not a warrior. Ninconi did not retreat. He stepped into the charge. In a movement too fast to follow, he deflected Stonehand's knife hand with his forearm, used his opponent's own momentum to spin him off balance, and drove the hilt of his own knife into the side of Stonehand's head. Stonehand stumbled, dazed, a gash opening on his temple. He shook his head, trying to clear it, but he was too slow. Nkoni pressed his advantage, not with a killing blow, but with a series of swift, disabling strikes. A slash across Stonehand's weapon arm caused him to drop his knife. A powerful kick to the knee sent him crashing to the ground. Nkoni stood over his defeated rival, his chest heaving, the tip of his blade resting on Stonehand's throat. The camp was utterly silent. The law was clear. The loser of such a challenge forfeited his life. Stonehand glared up at Nkoni, his eyes filled with hate, but also with the resignation of a man who knew his fate. "Finish it," he spat, blood trickling from his mouth. Nkoni looked down at the man who had been his brother in battle for years, now twisted by jealousy and fear. He looked out at the faces of his people, divided and frightened. He knew that killing Stonehand would satisfy the law, but it would also deepen the rift in the tribe, leaving a wound that might never heal. Then his eyes found Abigail's. He saw the terror in them, but also a plea for something other than more bloodshed. In her gaze, he saw a different kind of strength, one that was not about dominance, but about preservation. He pulled his knife away. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Stonehand looked up in stunned disbelief. "You are a Quahati warrior," Nkoni said, his voice ringing with authority. "But your heart is poisoned with hate. You see enemies where there should be allies. You see weakness in acts of healing. This is not the way of the people." He gestured to Stonehand's two closest followers. "Give him water and bind his wounds. He is banished. He will leave at sunrise and not return. If he is seen again in our lands, he will be killed as an enemy." The judgment was stunning in its mercy and its wisdom. It was a punishment more profound than death. It stripped Stonehand of his identity, his family, his entire world. Yet it spared his life, preventing the cycle of revenge that would have followed his execution. As Stonehand was dragged away, still shouting curses, she who sees stepped forward. "Tonight," she declared, her voice strong, "we saw a fight between two warriors, but we also saw the choice of a true leader. Nkoni has chosen the path of life, not death for his people." She turned her gaze to Abigail. "Nakoa Obai has shown us that new knowledge is not a threat to our spirit, but a tool for our survival. She did not take a life tonight. She saved one." The tide had turned. The descent was broken. Later that night, the camp was quiet. Abigail was tending to the shallow cut on Nkoni's arm, her touch gentle. The air in her teepee was thick with unspoken emotions. "You could have killed him," she said softly. "The law demanded it." "The law is a guide," he replied, his eyes never leaving her face. "A leader's heart must be the compass. My heart told me that more blood would not heal our people." He reached out and gently touched her cheek, his calloused fingers surprisingly soft against her skin. "Your heart taught me that." The space between them vanished. All the months of shared hardship, of silent understanding, of growing admiration and affection culminated in that moment. He lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of conquest or possession, but one of profound tenderness and respect. It was a kiss that sealed a bond forged in the crucible of desperation and survival. But even as they found solace in each other's arms, a new threat was gathering on the horizon. Miles away, the banished Stonehand, his heart black with vengeance, was riding hard. He wasn't riding to disappear into the wilderness. He was riding toward the faint glow of campfires on the plains, toward the blue-coated soldiers of the United States Cavalry, ready to trade the location of his people for his own bitter revenge. The tribe had survived its internal war, but a far more dangerous one was about to be brought to their doorstep. The peace within the camp was short-lived, a fragile blossom in the path of a wildfire. It was a young scout, barely a man, who brought the terrifying news. He had seen a long column of blue-coated soldiers, guided by a lone Comanche warrior, moving steadily toward their canyon. There was no doubt who the guide was. Stonehand's betrayal was complete. Panic rippled through the camp. The canyon, once a sanctuary, was now a trap. The soldiers, led by a notoriously ruthless officer named Captain Robert Sterling, were known for their no-quarter policy. To be caught would mean annihilation. A hasty council was called. The warriors were grim-faced, their talk turning to a glorious last stand, to dying with honor. But Nkoni, his face a mask of stone, looked at the faces of the women and children. He looked at Abigail. A glorious death was still a death. "We will not die here," he stated, his voice cutting through the fatalistic murmurs. "We will not give Sterling the battle he wants. We will run." It was a difficult thing for a proud warrior to say, but it was the only sane choice. The plan was desperate. Pack what they could, abandon the heavy teepees, and flee deeper into the labyrinthine canyons of the Llano Estacado, hoping to lose the soldiers in the harsh terrain. They worked with a frantic, disciplined urgency. As Abigail helped Little Fawn pack dried meat and supplies, she watched the warriors preparing their weapons, and a cold dread filled her. They could run, but the soldiers had better horses and endless supplies. It was a race they could not win. They needed more than a head start. They needed a miracle. Her mind raced, piecing together everything she knew. She knew the soldiers' tactics from the stories told at the trading post. They were methodical, relentless, but also predictable. They relied on scouts, bugle calls, and direct assaults. And she knew their greatest weakness, their arrogance. They would never expect a savage to outthink them. An idea, audacious and terrifyingly risky, sparked in her mind. She ran to find Nkoni, who was directing the evacuation. "They will follow your trail," she said, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "They will run you to ground and trap you. You can't just run. You have to trick them." "Trick them? How?" Nkoni asked, his attention divided. "You have to split their forces," she explained, her words tumbling out. "Send a small party of your best warriors and fastest horses in one direction, a false trail. Have them make it look like the whole tribe has gone that way. Let Sterling's main force follow them. Meanwhile, the rest of the people, the women and children, can escape in the other direction, moving slowly and covering their tracks." It was a classic military diversion, something she had read about in one of her father's old history books. Nkoni looked at her, truly seeing the strategic mind behind her healer's hands. "It is a good plan," he admitted. "But the warriors on the false trail, it would be a suicide mission. Sterling would corner and kill them all." "Not if they have a better destination," Abigail pressed, her eyes alight with the fire of her idea. "Don't send them onto the open plains. Send them west, toward the Buffalo Wallow." She pointed to a landmark Coney had once described to her. "A series of deep, muddy pits and treacherous ravines. It's impossible terrain for a large cavalry force. They can't charge. They'll have to dismount. Your warriors can use the terrain to hold them off, to bleed them, and then slip away in the confusion. It buys time." Nkoni stared at her, a slow look of awe dawning on his face. He called over his most trusted warriors and quickly explained Nakoa Obai's gambit. There were murmurs of doubt, but she who sees, who had overheard, silenced them. "The Braveheart's plan is touched by the spirits of the coyote and the fox," she declared. "It is a wise plan." Nakoni made his decision. He would lead the diversion himself with 30 of his best men. He appointed another warrior, a steady man named Iron Shirt, to lead the rest of the tribe to safety. As the tribe began to split into two groups, Nkoni found Abigail. The moment was fraught with the terrible weight of a possible last goodbye. "You have the heart of a warrior and the mind of a chief," he said, taking her hands in his. "You have saved us twice over. Whatever happens, live. Keep our people safe." "You must come back," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You must." He leaned in and kissed her, a fierce, desperate kiss filled with love and fear. "I will find you," he promised. He pressed a small, carved eagle feather into her hand. "Keep this. It will guide me back to you." Then he was gone, mounting his war pony and leading his small band of decoys away, their trail deliberately wide and obvious. Abigail watched until they were specks of dust against the red rock, her heart a cold stone in her chest. She went with Iron Shirt in the main group, her new skills put to the test. She helped the mothers with their children, tended to the elderly, and used her knowledge to help them move with as much stealth as possible, covering their tracks with branches. For 2 days they traveled in tense silence, constantly looking over their shoulders. On the morning of the third day, they heard it, the distant, unmistakable sound of rifle fire echoing through the canyons from the west. The battle at the Buffalo Wallow had begun. The sound was both terrifying and a sign of hope. Abigail's plan was working. Coney was buying them the time they desperately needed. They pushed on, their pace quickened by the sound of the fighting. They traveled for another day, the sounds of battle fading behind them, until they reached a hidden, spring-fed valley that Coney had described as a final sanctuary. They were exhausted, grieving for the warriors they presumed lost. But they were alive. They waited. Days turned into a week. Hope began to dwindle. Many believed Coney and his men had been wiped out. Abigail refused to believe it. She clung to the eagle feather, to her faith in him, an unquenchable fire. Then one evening at sunset, a lone rider appeared on the ridge overlooking the valley. He was gaunt, wounded, and weary, but he sat upon his horse with an unbreakable pride. It was Coney. Behind him, emerging from the shadows, came the survivors of his party. Not 30, but 17. They were battered and bloodied, but they were alive. They had led Sterling's troops on a deadly chase, inflicted heavy casualties in the treacherous terrain, and then vanished like ghosts into the canyons they knew so well. Abigail ran to him as he slid from his horse, her relief so overwhelming it felt like a physical blow. They met in a desperate embrace, clinging to each other amidst the joyous, tearful cries of their people. He was no longer just the warrior who had taken her as payment for a debt. He was her partner, her love, the leader she had helped to save. And she was no longer Abigail Hayes, the cast-off daughter of a coward. She was Nakoa Obey, the brave heart, a healer, a strategist, a woman who had found her true home, not in the world she was born to, but in the one she had fought for, bled for, and earned. Together they had faced the destruction of their world and had chosen a new path, one of survival, of wisdom, and of a love as vast and resilient as the land itself. The story of Nakoa Obai and the Comanche warrior Coney is a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. It's a journey that began with betrayal and captivity, but transformed into a powerful saga of love, acceptance, and survival against impossible odds. They were two people from warring worlds, brought together by a cruel debt, who discovered a shared humanity that transcended culture and conflict. Abigail didn't just tame a warrior's heart, she helped heal a nation, not with force, but with wisdom and courage, proving that sometimes the greatest weapon is a brave and compassionate heart. Their legend serves as a powerful reminder that even in the harshest of frontiers, hope can find a way to take root and flourish. If this story of courage and unlikely love moved you, please give this video a like. It truly helps our channel grow. Share it with someone else who loves epic tales from the Old West. And most importantly, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss our next story from the pages of history.